Welcome to Downtown Sports. My name is Downtown Stephen Brown, and in today's video, guys, there's some pretty big Toronto Maple Leafs trade rumors out there, so let's talk about them. In the latest edition of 32 Thoughts, Elliot Friedman writes, "There's no doubt in my mind that the Maple Leafs want Chris Tanev, but Calgary is holding to see if that first rounder comes into play. It's poker, but if Toronto really wanted to do that, it would be done already. We'll see. He would help them, and they know it. Maybe Toronto solves this problem by trying to trade for both Tanev and Noah Hanifin. They're also looking at adding another center." Now, we have to entertain the possibility that Elliott was more spitballing when he said that and not so much reporting. But at the same time, why would he be spitballing something like that if it wasn't at least a little bit possible? I don't see Elliott as being someone who's in the business of just starting rumors for the sake of it. But still, from going from the possibility of acquiring both Nikita Zadorov and Chris Tanev in a package earlier in the season before Zadorov was shipped off to Vancouver, to now talking about acquiring both Noah Hanifin and Chris Tanev. Mind you, all three of the players in this conversation are unrestricted free agents at the end of this season. For a team that doesn't have very many assets to play with to begin with, I don't necessarily think it would be very smart for them to spend a king's ransom on guys who could just walk at the end of the season. I said it in my previous video, and I'll say it again in this one. It's not that the Toronto Maple Leafs cannot trade a first-round pick or some of their best prospects, period. It's that they can't afford to trade any of those pieces for rental players, for guys who are just going to walk out the door for nothing at the end of this year. Guys like Ryan O'Reilly, guys like Nick Foligno. If they are going to make a trade where they are going to deal one of their better prospects or a first-round pick, it's going to have to be the type of trade that they made with Chicago last year, where they got a top four defenseman like Jake McCabe, who's going to be here when it's all said and done for 3 playoff runs at $2 million. And that's probably why the Maple Leafs are so interested in a guy like Chris Tanev. Obviously, Brad Treliving feels that he can re-sign the player at a reasonable number for next season as well. And at that point, I would be more willing to entertain the idea. Noah Hanifin as a rental player is an absolute non-starter. I'm not interested in giving up an absolute king's ransom for a guy who's going to walk out the door at the end of the season. But what's on the screen right now is an article from TSN.ca from the end of November where Pierre LeBrun is suggesting that Noah Hanifin could be a candidate for a sign and trade. Now, a sign and trade is a fun idea that gets tossed around every single year in the NHL with about a handful of players in situations like Noah Hanifin's, but it just never happens. But if it were on the table here, maybe you're asking yourself, Steven, how the hell can the Maple Leafs afford a defenseman making $7.5 million when 4 guys are going to be making over $10 million next season? It's a great question. It really is. Because before I sat down and did this armchair GM, I didn't think it was really all that possible without sacrificing a lot of depth on next year's team. But at the same time, we answer questions like this on this channel all the time. And if you're not familiar or if you've forgotten, I understand I haven't made a video like this in a very long time, but I promise you we will be making these more frequently. If you don't know what's on the screen right now, it's capfriendly.com's armchair GM feature where you can just pretend to be the general manager of whatever team you want to be. You can make trades, signings, and play with the lines. I use it because it's a very easy tool to just display all this information. So what you're looking at on the screen right now is a hypothetical guess at what the Maple Leafs could afford if you plugged in a defenseman making $7.5 million next year. Now, there's a lot of projections on the screen, and there's some placeholders here because it's 4 o'clock in the morning, and I'm not trying to be Brad Treliving. I'm just trying to make a video here. There's minus $265,000 in the corner. I don't really feel like splitting hairs between if Timothy Liljegren is going to get $2.25 million next season or $2.5 million. The point is that this is a hypothetical rough guess. This is a bit of a side note, but I think it's worth mentioning here because I have a $3.55 million placeholder penciled in for them at the backup goaltending position. And that's how much money Ilya Samsonov makes right now. So they could bring back Samsonov, have Joseph Woll and Dennis Hildeby as their third goalie next year, and that would be the goaltending depth. But I really wish they would have given Dennis Hildeby an opportunity to play a couple of games during that stretch where both Woll and Samsonov were both unavailable to the team. A small sample size is better than no sample size, and if he showed that he was at least capable of being a backup goalie, well, then maybe the Maple Leafs have the option to go into next year with a young, cheap goaltending duo, and it allows them to sprinkle some extra money around the rest of their roster. Maybe this $2.5 million that they would have in this scenario could go from making this a so-so placeholder in the top six to somebody who can really make an impact. And it's not so far of a stretch. I mean, yes, he is 22, turning 23, but he's got 3 professional seasons under his belt, and he's basically at the same point that Joseph Woll was last season. He was named an American Hockey League All-Star, and he's really playing well with the Toronto Marlies. Now, this hypothetical roster also has Fraser Minten and Nick Robertson on it. And if you're acquiring both Chris Tanev and Noah Hanifin, it's safe to assume that one, if not both of those guys, may be included in that trade. I don't know what the trade really looks like. It would be a lot. But in this hypothetical scenario, you're acquiring a top pairing defenseman in Noah Hanifin who would be coming with a contract extension, and you're also acquiring Chris Tanev, who even at the age of 34 is a reliable top 4 shutdown option. The asking price for Chris Tanev alone as a second-round pick, adding in Noah Hanifin with a contract extension, would make that trade astronomical. You know, you're looking at a first-round pick, Fraser Minten, maybe Nick Robertson, Topi Niemela with the Toronto Marlies, TJ Brody, maybe to make the money work, and then the Flames could flip him for something else at the deadline. Maybe even that's not enough. I don't know. One prospect, however, that I would be hesitant to include in the deal is Easton Cowan, who, in terms of points per game, is having one of the best under 19 seasons in the Ontario Hockey League in the last 10 years. The point is that the Leafs have the assets to facilitate a trade of that magnitude. But then they would go from having very little future assets to actually having nothing in the cupboards. While a trade of that size would be fun, and you could see how it would be possible and how it would make the team better and how you can kind of justify it, I don't think that's what's going to happen. More realistically, Elliot Friedman did mention that they are interested in acquiring another centerman. And let's talk about why. Because acquiring a defenseman is not the only way that you can make your team better defensively. You can make your forward group more defensively responsible and alleviate some of that pressure on your blue line. I said it in my previous video, I'll say it again in this one. If there isn't a defenseman available that makes sense, I'm not interested in jamming a square peg into a round hole. There are other ways to improve this team defensively. You know, can you spend a couple of mid-round picks on some defensive first wingers to create a better shutdown line with David Kampf? I know ideally you would just go out there and acquire a better centerman, but that's going to be more expensive. The idea is to not break the bank, but also improve the team defensively. Somebody that I would be interested in is a guy like Nick Bjugstad on the Arizona Coyotes. He's big, he plays center, he can win faceoffs, he plays a lot of shifts in his own zone. His advanced analytics are pretty good. He signed through next season as well at just over $2 million. And last year, he went for a third-round pick at the deadline. Kevin suggested a guy like Nick Dowd, and yeah, he signed for 2 years at $1.3 million. His advanced numbers are very good, but at the same time, you see stuff like this, and that's just ridiculous. I'm not paying a first-round pick for Nick Dowd. If the cost to acquire Nick Bjugstad is also a first-round pick, I gotta tell you, maybe the Leafs are just in trouble this year. You know, last season, Bjugstad went for a third. A guy like Pierre Engvall went for a third-round pick, although not Pierre Engvall. You know, a guy like Nola Chari was a throw-in guy in the Ryan O'Reilly deal. Guys like that. I'm not paying a first-round pick for one of those guys, though. Shifting gears to another Leafs rumor here, because Anthony DeMarco is a reporter for the Flyers, and he's linked Rasmus Ristolainen to the Toronto Maple Leafs a couple of times now, and that's concerning to me. Because like Beetlejuice, if you say his name enough, Rasmus Ristolainen could just appear in a Maple Leafs jersey eventually. He notes that the Flyers are willing to retain on him, which, yes, they would have to, because he's got a travesty of a contract of over $5 million and 4 years remaining on it. But then also notes that if they retained, they would want a first-round pick for him. No, the Leafs are not paying a first-round pick for Rasmus Ristolainen. I love analytics. I love numbers. I love player cards like this. And it's not a shot at Andy and Rono, but I don't like when people post these cards and they don't contextualize the numbers, right? It's important to see what role that player is playing when they're producing those numbers, you know? If you put me in a softball game with a bunch of 8-year-olds, I'm going to hit a lot of home runs. But if you put me in a game with like major league caliber pitching, I'm going to strike out every single time. This is puckiq.com, and I use them a lot in my research because it shows you the percentage of time on ice that a player spends playing up against the other team's best players. And according to puckiq.com, Rasmus Ristolainen is dead last on the Flyers' blue line in terms of percentage of ice time spent playing up against the other team's best players. And even when he does, he's playing mostly an offensive role. This player card makes Rasmus Ristolainen look like a useful player. But when you consider that he's being spoon-fed the minutes that he plays and the matchups that he goes up against, we're not going to be tricked by this. Leaf fans cannot be tricked by this. If Brad Treliving is tricked by this, we're going to have problems. I'm not very smart, but if you don't think I don't know a pump and dump when I see one, you know, the Leafs did this years ago with Dion Phaneuf, where they played him in soft, cushy minutes to prop up his advanced analytics, hoping that a general manager would come along that's desperate enough, and one eventually did, and Lou Lamoriello found a way to not retain any money in that deal. And that really accelerated the Maple Leafs' rebuild. But I'm here to tell you that hopefully, anyway, Brad Treliving, you know, the Leafs staff, there's probably a couple of people still kicking around from when they made that trade. You know, somebody go talk to Brad because there's no way. But more than likely, it's just lip service. You know, maybe there was a conversation once in passing, and then that rumor gets leaked out there, and because it's the Leafs, 100 people are going to write articles about it, and then the Flyers get to use the Leafs in a sense to spread the word that Rasmus Ristolainen is available. But that's going to be it for the video, guys. Make sure to like it if you did like it, and subscribe for more because more is always on the way. And I will see you in the next one, hopefully on either Monday or Tuesday.